You know, when you look at a company, maybe you see a highly successful woman or a racial minority in a top leadership spot, and you instantly think, wow, they really have their diversity figured out. I mean, we all do it. It's kind of automatic to view these standout leaders as purely beneficial role models who are out there shattering glass ceilings. But what if I told you that our brains are actually playing a massive trick on us? What if the very success of these individuals is inadvertently masking a much, much deeper problem? Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a fascinating, highly counterintuitive, and frankly, a bit of an unsettling psychological phenomenon. We're going to look at some groundbreaking research that reveals exactly how seeing highly successful minority employees tricks our brains, inflates our perceptions of workplace diversity, and creates what researchers call a diversity paradox. See, we usually operate under a pretty straightforward assumption. Breaking stereotypes is just universally a good thing. We figure that when underrepresented minorities succeed, it reduces prejudice, sets these great inclusive norms, and creates vital role models. But the reality? Well, the data shows it's a lot more complex and surprisingly pretty ironic. The actual act of a minority individual succeeding at the highest levels can actually inflate our perception of how diverse an organization really is, which ultimately hinders further progress. To get a handle on exactly how our minds deceive us, we'll quickly walk through 4 areas: the diversity paradox, the science of salience, the stereotype exception, and finally, the ripple effect. Okay, let's jump straight into part 1, the diversity paradox. So, conventional wisdom paints a really positive picture here. The current literature overwhelmingly says that hiring successful women and racial minorities directly weakens prejudice in the workplace. When we see someone defy the odds, it basically forces us to drop lazy stereotypes, and it sets an inclusive norm. It feels like a total win-win, right? Well, not entirely. And here is the cognitive twist. Because an individual's massive success conflicts with underlying systemic societal expectations regarding their group's competence, these individuals become incredibly noticeable. They become what psychologists refer to as highly salient. They literally stand out dramatically to everyone around them, both inside and outside the company. And that heightened visibility? That is exactly where the cognitive trap gets set. Which brings us right into section 2, the science of salience. To explain why standing out is such an issue, we need to look at dual process theory, and this really quick mental shortcut our brains use called attribute substitution. When we're asked to make a really complex assessment, like, hey, how diverse is this massive company of 10,000 people, our brains get kind of lazy. Instead of doing the hard math, we substitute it with a much simpler, quicker judgment. We just ask ourselves, how easily can I think of a minority employee here? And because that highly successful minority leader is so salient, so visible, they just pop right into our minds instantly. The late Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman actually nailed this concept using shark attacks. Just like a highly publicized, terrifying shark attack tricks our brains into thinking the ocean is just swarming with sharks everywhere we swim, a highly visible, successful minority employee tricks us into thinking the whole company is highly diverse. We basically mistake how much someone stands out with how many of them there actually are. So it works like a step-by-step trap. First, an individual achieves high success, which completely defies ingrained societal expectations. Because it breaks that norm, that person becomes highly salient and grabs our attention. And then finally, we fall right into the trap. We mistakenly assume that one person's massive visibility represents the overall group's prevalence. And this isn't just theory. Researchers tested this using real S&P 500 data. They showed participants actual companies with full information about their board of directors. The result? Simply having a woman as the CEO caused participants to significantly overestimate the overall percentage of women on the entire board. I mean, these participants were looking right at the hard data, but the standout success of that one woman CEO completely warped their perception of the company's true diversity. Let's move on to section 3, the stereotype exception. Because here is where it gets super interesting. This doesn't happen with every minority group. The researchers tested a fascinating boundary condition. They contrasted the stereotypes facing Black Americans with the controversial model minority stereotype that's often applied to Asian Americans. That model minority stereotype falsely homogenizes Asian Americans as universally highly competent and successful. What the researchers found is that this illusion of diversity specifically relies on the individual defying expectations. Because the success of Black employees counteracts negative societal stereotypes, they become highly salient, and that inflates diversity estimates.
But because the success of Asian employees unfortunately aligns with the expected model minority stereotype, they don't stand out in that same expectation-defying way. As a result, they don't inflate diversity estimates to nearly the same degree.
If you look at the data here, the difference is just stark. Exposure to highly successful Black employees caused estimates of overall racial diversity to spike to 33.2%, which is way over the actual 25% baseline. But on the flip side, exposure to equally successful Asian employees kept those estimates much closer to reality. It really proves that our brain is reacting specifically to a broken stereotype.
Okay, bringing us to our final section, the ripple effect. So what? Why does this mental illusion matter? Well, this isn't just some harmless brain teaser. The downstream damage is entirely real. If our quick, intuitive thinking tells us the diversity problem is already solved because we see a woman CEO or a Black executive, it inadvertently stops actual progress dead in its tracks. It reduces stakeholders' concerns, it lowers support for actual diversity initiatives, and most critically, it weakens the organization's desire to actually hire additional underrepresented minorities. Researchers back this up with a massive analysis of over 10,000 UK organizations. They found that women's representation in the top quartile of pay, so the highest earners, had a 6.4 times larger effect on perceived gender diversity than the representation in the bottom quartile. Think about that for a second. One highly paid woman at the very top skews our perception more than 6 women working at the bottom of the pay scale. The real-world stakes here are massive. Overestimating diversity is actually positively correlated with larger actual gender pay gaps within those very companies. That means that quality efforts are stalling out exactly when we think they're succeeding. A single success story at the top creates this sort of halo effect that completely hides systemic inequalities at the bottom, making it so much harder to achieve true organization-wide equity. Ultimately, this explainer shows us that our brains are incredibly susceptible to the halo of standout success. We literally cannot rely on our gut feelings when we look at an organization's leadership page or see a single successful minority leader. And it leaves us with a really profound challenge. If phenomenal success is blinding us to the lack of overall progress, how do we systematically ensure true equity without getting distracted by a few exceptional stories at the top?